Imagine standing in a place where the horizon never seems to end. No great cities. No towering temples. No marble roads. No monuments that proclaim the glory of an empire. Only endless grasslands stretching farther than the eye can see. This was the Mongolian steppe. For centuries, it was one of the harshest environments on Earth. Winter temperatures could plunge far below freezing. Summer droughts turned fertile grass into dry earth. Violent winds swept across the open plains without warning. Life here was unforgiving. Survival depended on constant movement. Families traveled with their herds across enormous distances, searching for fresh pasture before the seasons changed again. Home was never a permanent place. It moved with the people. From an early age, every child learned the skills of survival. They rode horses before they could fully walk. They learned to hunt, to endure hunger, to navigate vast landscapes with almost no landmarks, to rely on one another when nature offered no mercy. The steppe rewarded resilience. It punished weakness. But the greatest dangers did not always come from nature. The Mongolian plains were divided among dozens of rival tribes. Alliances formed and disappeared with remarkable speed. Loyalty was fragile. Conflict was common. Raids, revenge, and competition for land and livestock shaped everyday life. Every tribe fought to survive. Few imagined ruling anything beyond the next valley. To the powerful civilization surrounding them, these nomadic tribes appeared insignificant. To the south stood the wealthy Jin dynasty. To the west, powerful kingdoms controlled prosperous trade routes. To the Islamic world and to Europe, the steppe was little more than a distant wilderness inhabited by wandering horsemen. Few outside the grasslands paid them much attention. History often begins in places that seem unimportant. And sometimes the people who change the world are the ones no one expects. In the middle of the 12th century, one child was born into this uncertain world. He was not born inside a palace. He inherited no great kingdom. No one could have imagined that his name would one day be known across nearly every continent. His early life was marked not by privilege, but by hardship, by betrayal, by loss, by survival. Long before the world would know him as Genghis Khan, he was simply a boy named Temujin, and the forgotten steppe was about to produce one of history's greatest transformations. History remembers him as Genghis Khan, but legends often hide the struggles that came before greatness. Long before he commanded the largest contiguous empire in history, he was simply Temujin, a boy born into uncertainty. His father, Yasugei, was the chief of a small Mongol clan. For a brief moment, Temujin's future appeared secure. But everything changed when he was only 9 years old. While returning from arranging his son's future marriage, Yasugei was poisoned by rival tribes. His death shattered the family's fragile position. Without a leader, their own clan abandoned them. Temujin, his mother, and his siblings were left alone on the vast steppe. No wealth, no protection, no powerful allies, only the constant struggle to survive. They lived by gathering wild plants, catching fish, and hunting small animals. Some days there was barely enough food for everyone. Survival became their only goal. For many, such hardship would have marked the end of their story. For Temujin, it became the beginning. The years that followed tested him in ways few leaders would ever experience. He witnessed betrayal from people he trusted. He experienced hunger that never seemed to end. At one point, he was captured by a rival tribe and forced into slavery. Bound by a heavy wooden collar, escape seemed impossible. Yet even in captivity, opportunity appeared where others saw none. One sympathetic family secretly helped him flee into the darkness. Temujin survived, not because he was the strongest, but because he refused to surrender. Every hardship taught him something about people. He learned that loyalty could not be demanded. It had to be earned. He learned that fear could force obedience, but trust inspired commitment. He also learned another lesson that would change history. Among the tribes of the steppe, leadership was often inherited through noble birth. Temujin saw the weaknesses of that system. He believed ability mattered more than ancestry. Courage mattered more than family name. Loyalty mattered more than privilege. As he slowly gathered followers, he rewarded those who proved themselves. Skilled warriors rose through merit. Trusted advisors came from many different backgrounds. Men who had once been enemies became valued allies. This was a revolutionary idea on the Mongolian steppe. People did not follow Temujin simply because of who his father had been. They followed him because they believed in the leader he had become. One by one, scattered tribes began joining his cause. Some through alliances, others through negotiation, others through war. For the first time in generations, the possibility of unity began to replace endless tribal conflict. Then, in the year 1206, representatives from the Mongol tribes gathered in a great assembly known as a Kurultai. There, Temujin received a new title. A title the world would never forget. Genghis Khan, often translated as Universal Ruler. It marked far more than the rise of a single man. It marked the birth of an entirely new nation. The scattered tribes of the steppe had become one people. But uniting the Mongols was only the beginning. Beyond the endless grasslands lay kingdoms, empires, and civilizations that believed themselves untouchable. None of them realized that history was about to change forever. The unification of the Mongol tribes marked the beginning of a new era. But unity alone could not explain what happened next. History had seen powerful kingdoms before. It had seen brilliant generals. It had seen disciplined armies. Yet within only a few decades, the Mongols accomplished something no civilization had ever achieved. They built the largest contiguous empire in human history. The answer was not simply superior numbers. In fact, the Mongols were often heavily outnumbered. Nor was it advanced technology. Many of their enemies possessed larger cities, stronger fortifications, and greater wealth. The Mongols possessed something far more valuable: a completely different way of thinking. Their greatest weapon was speed. Every Mongol warrior rode several horses, changing mounts throughout a campaign. While other armies slowed from exhaustion, the Mongols continued moving. They crossed deserts, mountain ranges, frozen rivers, and vast grasslands with astonishing speed. An enemy could believe itself safe 1 week, only to find Mongol horsemen at its gates the next. But speed alone did not win wars. Information did. Long before launching an attack, Mongol scouts gathered intelligence. They studied roads, rivers, mountain passes, food supplies, enemy defenses, even political rivalries within the kingdoms they intended to invade. Every campaign began with knowledge. The battlefield was often decided before the first arrow was released. Communication became another extraordinary advantage. Across the empire, relay stations allowed messengers to travel hundreds of miles with remarkable efficiency. Orders moved rapidly between commanders. Information flowed faster than many rival governments could react. An army that communicates quickly can adapt quickly. And adaptation became the defining strength of the Mongols. They learned from every opponent. When they encountered superior siege technology in China, they adopted it. When engineers from conquered lands demonstrated new weapons, they employed them. When foreign specialists possessed valuable knowledge, they became part of the empire instead of its victims. The Mongols had little interest in preserving tradition simply because it was tradition. If something worked, they used it. This willingness to learn made them stronger with every campaign. Perhaps their most powerful weapon, however, never required a sword. It was fear. Stories of Mongol victories spread faster than the armies themselves. Entire cities surrendered without resistance after hearing what had happened elsewhere. The reputation of the Mongols became a psychological force. Sometimes the expectation of defeat proved more powerful than the battle itself. Yet beneath that fear stood remarkable discipline. Every warrior understood his role. Every commander was accountable. Promotion depended on ability rather than noble birth. Success came through competence. Failure carried consequences. The system rewarded results, not status. This transformed thousands of individual horsemen into a coordinated military machine. But the greatest secret of Mongol warfare was neither speed, nor intelligence, nor fear. It was flexibility. Most armies forced the battlefield to fit their plans. The Mongols changed their plans to fit the battlefield. They adapted to unfamiliar terrain, unexpected resistance, changing weather, new technologies. Every obstacle became another lesson. Every campaign became another opportunity to improve. While many empires believed their greatest victories proved they had already mastered war, the Mongols believed mastery required constant learning. That mindset changed everything. Kingdom after kingdom fell. Cities that had stood for centuries opened their gates. Empires that considered themselves invincible suddenly faced an enemy unlike any they had ever known. But conquering the world presented an entirely different challenge. Winning battles was one thing. Ruling millions of people across continents would require something even more extraordinary. History often remembers the Mongols for the cities they conquered, for the battles they won, for the fear they inspired. But conquest alone cannot explain the longevity of their empire. Winning a war is one challenge. Governing the largest contiguous empire in history is another. By the middle of the 13th century, Mongol rule stretched from the Pacific Ocean to Eastern Europe. It encompassed deserts, forests, mountains, grasslands, and some of the richest cities on Earth. Millions of people spoke different languages, practiced different religions, followed different traditions. No empire had ever attempted to govern such diversity on such a scale. The Mongols understood that an empire could not survive through military force alone. It required order. One of their greatest strengths was adaptability. Rather than forcing every conquered society to abandon its customs, the Mongols often allowed local traditions to continue. Religious leaders were generally free to worship. Merchants continued to trade. Local administrators frequently remained in office, provided they accepted Mongol authority and fulfilled their obligations. This practical approach reduced resistance and allowed vast territories to function with remarkable stability. Trade flourished as never before. Under Mongol protection, routes across Asia became safer than they had been for centuries. Merchants, scholars, engineers, physicians, and travelers crossed enormous distances with unprecedented freedom. Goods moved from China to the Middle East. Ideas traveled alongside silk, spices, and precious metals. Technologies spread across continents. Cultures encountered one another in ways that had rarely been possible before. Historians now refer to this period as the Pax Mongolica. For a time, the empire connected much of the known world. Knowledge became one of its greatest resources. The Mongols actively recruited skilled people from conquered lands. Engineers built siege machines. Astronomers improved calendars. Doctors shared medical knowledge. Artisans introduced new techniques. Ability mattered more than origin. If someone possessed valuable knowledge, they could find opportunity within the empire. This philosophy reflected the same principle that had once united the tribes of the steppe. Merit over privilege. Competence over status. Communication also remained essential. An extensive relay network carried official messages across thousands of miles. Fresh horses waited at stations throughout the empire, allowing information to travel with remarkable speed. A ruler could not be everywhere. but information could. This network allowed the Mongols to respond to distant events more quickly than many of their rivals thought possible. Law provided another foundation. Genghis Khan established a legal code designed to maintain discipline and order throughout the empire. Although local customs often remained in place, certain principles applied across Mongol territory. Military discipline, loyalty, justice, responsibility. For an empire built by conquest, stability depended upon predictable rules. Yet even the strongest systems faced challenges. As the empire expanded, governing distant regions became increasingly difficult. Communication, though extraordinary for its time, still required weeks or months across vast distances. Different branches of the ruling family began pursuing their own ambitions. Regional interests slowly replaced shared purpose. The very size that had become the empire's greatest achievement also became one of its greatest tests. History reminds us that building something extraordinary is only the beginning. Preserving it demands constant effort. The Mongols had transformed the world through speed, adaptability, and leadership. But every empire eventually faces a question that no army can answer. How do you keep people united after the conquest is over? The answer would determine not only the future of the Mongol Empire, but the legacy it would leave behind. Every empire reaches a moment when expansion begins to slow. For the Mongols, that moment came not because they had found an enemy too powerful to defeat, but because they had become too vast to remain united. After the death of Genghis Khan, the empire continued to expand under his successors. Its armies reached Eastern Europe. They conquered much of the Middle East. They completed the conquest of China. For a time, it seemed there was no limit to what the Mongols could achieve. Yet history has a way of reminding us that every success creates new challenges. The empire stretched across thousands of miles. Messages traveled faster than ever before. But distance remained an obstacle no horse could completely overcome. Gradually, different branches of the ruling family began governing their own regions with increasing independence. The empire evolved into several great khanates. Each remained connected by a shared heritage, but each pursued its own ambitions. Over time, those connections weakened. The largest empire in history did not collapse in a single dramatic moment. It slowly transformed into separate states. Its political unity faded, but its influence did not. The Mongols changed the course of history in ways that extended far beyond conquest. They reopened trade across Asia. They accelerated the exchange of knowledge between civilizations. They connected cultures that had rarely encountered one another before. Ideas, inventions, religions, technologies, and goods crossed continents with unprecedented speed. The world became more connected than it had ever been. Yet perhaps the greatest legacy of the Mongols was not the territory they controlled. It was the principles that made their rise possible. They understood that adaptability is stronger than rigidity. That talent matters more than privilege. That information is often more valuable than numbers. That speed comes not only from movement, but from decision-making. Most importantly, they proved that greatness does not always begin in places of wealth or power. Sometimes it begins in the harshest environments imaginable, where survival demands resilience, where hardship creates discipline, where every challenge becomes an opportunity to learn. The story of the Mongol Empire is not simply the story of conquest. It is the story of transformation. A forgotten people became history's greatest empire because they refused to accept the limits that others placed upon them. That is the hidden pattern. Throughout history, the civilizations that change the world are rarely those with the greatest advantages. They are often the ones that adapt the fastest. The names of the empires change. The technology changes. The world changes. But human behavior remains remarkably familiar. The rise of the Mongol Empire reminds us that success is rarely an accident. It is built through vision, through resilience, through leadership, and through the willingness to learn faster than everyone else. History remembers the empire they built, but the real story began long before the victories, long before the battles, long before the world knew the name Genghis Khan. It began on an endless steppe, where survival itself became the greatest teacher. And perhaps that is the timeless lesson history still offers us today. The greatest transformations are born not from comfort, but from the courage to adapt.